The clerk typed my name twice, then looked at the screen and shook her head. I didn't have to book any seats under the name Mercer. I had 2 rooms, one for Richard and Carol Mercer and the other for Catherine and Derek Power. That was it. I put down my bag and called my mom. She answered after the 4th ring, and Catherine laughed at what she'd said in the background. "Mom, there's no seat for me." She paused, as she always did when she was confused. "Honey, I thought you'd understand. You always do." She made it clear she was thanking me. Behind her, I heard Catherine asking Derek if the pool water was hot. Mom had been planning a 3-night family vacation in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, at a mountain lodge in late October. She hadn't prepared a crib for her baby. She hadn't forgotten. Forgetting seems to be something different. Forgetting comes with a struggle and an effort to fix it, accompanied by laughter. After 48 hours, every member of my family wishes they'd removed that room. Welcome to the world of silent drama. I'm Rosalind, 32, a financial research manager from Charlotte, North Carolina. My parents planned a family vacation and forgot to take me, but they didn't. If your family confuses your independence with your need for love, this story is for you. Leave a comment and subscribe. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment 12 minutes from my office in Charlotte. Every morning at 5:45, I'd drink black coffee and stand at the table as the sun rose over the parking lot across the street. I was the director of financial research at a downtown investment firm. 50 weeks of quarterly reports and conference calls where my voice echoed through speakers in 3 time zones. I built that life from scratch. I graduated from the University of Texas at Knoxville on a scholarship and a place in the Hodges Library. I graduated after working 17-hour weeks full-time, with no one between lectures or in the classroom. The only person in the room was my classmate 9. The dean called my name out loud because he called my name out loud. Our grandfather, Arthur, paid my sister Catherine's tuition every semester, no questions asked, and she dropped out of the University of Texas Business School after 1 semester because she said the professors didn't encourage her to think critically. Knoxville married Derek Hale at 28 and had a son Liam at 31. She was unemployed for 7 years. My parents didn't comment on this change, and it wasn't necessary. The family had already decided each girl's fate. Catherine would be her guardian, and I would be her guardian. Despite all this, the scholarships no one respected, the promotions no one asked for, the apartment no one visited. I drove 4 hours down I-40 through the Smoky Mountains every Christmas, every Easter, every Thanksgiving, every New Year's. I was there for 4 hours, 4 hours ago. I never got lost. I thought going there was enough to prove I belonged. My mother called Charlotte in August when the heat was intense and the pavements were starting to burn at midday. We were all headed to the mountains. Catherine had found a great spot in Gatlinburg, a fire pit and a pool on the main road. The leaves would be at their most vibrant in the first week of October. "We'll all go," she said. "By the way, things fall into place." I asked them about the pieces. "Your dad reserved them for himself." I texted my dad that night. "Am I part 2 or 3? He replied after 40 minutes. "Are you ready? Don't worry." I read the message, hung up, and believed it. People ask me later why I didn't try harder. Why didn't I call the hotel myself to confirm? The answer is simple. I shouldn't have. Your father says he's been treated. You believe him. I requested 3 days off work. It was my first time off since a long weekend in Savannah last year. I brought my walking shoes, the novel I'd been keeping, and a bottle of Malbec wine that I planned to open on the porch with my mother after dinner. Catherine and I imagined Liam reaching out and picking leaves. I imagined Dad reading on the porch and Mom ordering lots of food at the restaurant, and us all laughing along with him. My family lived in the Knoxville area, and Gatlinburg was an hour's drive away. I was from Charlotte, and it was a 4-hour drive through the mountains. On Friday morning, I put my bag in the trunk and strapped the wine bottle to the passenger seat like a gun. The drive was amazing, believe me. I headed west on I-40 and then south through the Smoky Mountains. The October foliage was exactly as the brochures promised. Red maple, golden ash, a type of birch that seemed to glow from within. I lowered the windows and turned off the radio, and for the first time, I felt as though I was moving away from one thing and into another. I arrived at the cottage's car park at exactly 3 in the afternoon. A large wooden building with rocking chairs on the surrounding porch and a stone chimney that was already belching smoke. I picked up my bag and entered through 2 doors into a lobby redolent with cinnamon and cedarwood, a place that tried to make you feel at home. The receptionist was a young woman, maybe 23, with a badge that said Alyssa, and she smiled at me as I approached. I went in. Rosalind Mercer, I paid, turned around, paid again. That smile faded, replaced by a cautious one. There were 2 rooms below Mercer's. Richard and Carol Mercer were in room 214. Catherine and Derek Haley were in room 216. There were no vacancies. I looked at the screen pointed at me. 2 rooms, the parents in one, and Catherine, Derek, and 4-year-old Liam in the other. My name isn't anywhere. Is there anything else? She looked at me and shook her head. We're exhausted, ma'am. It's the fallow season. We've been trapped for months. I stood there, clutching my bag handle in one hand and the phone in the other, and called my mother, and you know what she said. I heard the front doors open and a child's voice echoing between the wooden beams. Catherine came in wearing new shoes and a worn jacket. Derek followed, carrying a backpack on each shoulder, while Liam ran towards the fireplace. She saw me standing at the table with my bag and stopped. It's not like you stop when you're surprised, but when you decide how you're going to handle the situation. What's the problem? She said loudly, and the families across the table turned to look at her. She told them there was no room for me. She turned to Liam, then looked at Derek, then back at me, her voice clearly audible in the hallway. We booked rooms for me, my husband, and my son. We're a real family. She said it as if explaining the seating chart to a caterer. Derek smiled. It wasn't a smile, just a slight tilt of his lips that suggested agreement, but he didn't want to make a strong impression. My mother twirled her purse strap and studied the stone floor as if she held an answer. My father stood there, phone in hand, scrolling through something, simultaneously present and absent. Other families were in the hall, watching. A woman with 2 small children, an elderly couple by the fireplace, a secretary with her hand frozen on the keyboard. I stood there, my bag in my right hand, the 4-hour journey a torment, my sister's words echoing in the air, scented with cedarwood like the smoke from the fireplace. I didn't count anything. I didn't measure anything. I stood there for a few seconds, as if the room held its breath, and looked at Catherine, then at my mother, then at my father, but none of them moved. Catherine raised her chin. Carol lowered her eyes. Richard took out the phone, not with anger, but with the cold clarity of a number that had settled after years of not counting. I realized that I was standing in a room full of people with the same last name, and not one of them had found a seat for me. I grabbed my bag, then I'm leaving. I said it calmly and serenely, as if I were reading a number at a board meeting. No trembling, no tears. I turned and walked down the hall, past the stone fireplace where Liam had stacked the brochures, past my family and the little children looking at me, past the rocking chairs on the porch, and up the stairs to the car park where my car was parked and a bottle of wine on the passenger seat. The front door opened behind me, and my mother's voice echoed through the gravel. Rosalind, don't get so worked up. We'll figure something out. I didn't turn around. I put my bag in the trunk, got in, started the engine, and my mother's image appeared in the rearview mirror, her arms at her sides, her mouth still open, standing on the porch of a house big enough for everyone but me. I shot him again on the Malbec Road. I didn't open it. I didn't open anything. I was driving. In October, I was driving north through Gatlinburg on Route 441, a narrow, touristy road. At 2:10, I was driving with my hands clasped, my phone vibrating like a ghost stuck to the dashboard. Mom, Catherine, Dad, Mom again, Catherine again. I didn't answer. I didn't look at the screen. I kept my eyes on the road and my feet firmly planted. I drove 20 miles north to Severville. The tourist trail was fading, the river was quiet, and the mountains no longer held any allure. The Riverbend Lodge was a white, 2-story building set back from the road, behind a row of maple trees, with a hand-printed sign by the office door. I turned around, parked the car, and went inside. A woman, probably in her 60s, wearing glasses with chains, was behind the desk, peering through a sheet of paper. "You alone, dear? Just me?" She offered me a room on the 7th floor, on the ground floor, at the back of the building, with windows overlooking the Little Pigeon River. $89 a night. I put my bag down on the gravel path, opened the door, and placed it on the bed, a blanket that smelled of dried lavender. I could hear the river from the window, nothing else. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I missed 34 calls. I didn't count them right away. My phone showed me the number on the lock screen, like an unpaid bill. $89. That was the price of a modest room in my parents' house. They spent 1,300 rand on 2 rooms. They couldn't even get 89 rand for a girl who had driven 4 hours to get there. The ceiling fan in room 7 was wobbly. Every third rotation, it would hit something, a nail or a support. It was like a metronome, quiet and steady, waiting for the rhythm of a song no one was playing. I sat up in bed and answered the phone. A series of 12 text messages from my mom comparing her mood swings to the accuracy of a stock chart. Funny, then she ruined her trip. Then she's calling me now. Then Catherine got upset. And finally, after the last 20 minutes. Oh well. I looked at her twice, searching for something different, not an excuse. I knew the truth. I was searching for an explanation for what had happened. "We should have booked your room," or "Katrina shouldn't have said that." I found nothing. Not a single word in the 12 letters placed the blame solely on me. When I left, it was all over. I refused to go back, and I refused to mimic their actions with a smile. I placed the phone on the bedroom table and faced it. I opened the bottle of Malbec wine I had intended to share with my mother and poured myself a glass from a paper cup in the bathroom. I sat on the floor with my back to the bed, listening to the sound of the ceiling fan and drinking the wine alone in a room that cost no more than my sister's new shoes. The river continued to flow in the darkness. Nothing changed. It was the quietest thing I'd heard all day. But the text messages weren't the worst. They arrived the next morning. I was sitting in that room listening to the ceiling fan, my phone full blast. I'd missed 34 calls. Not one of them apologized. Those of you who call your families to come back without apologizing know exactly how that pillow felt that night. Follow along. What you did next made it easier for you to leave. I have to tell you about Christmas 3 years ago at the hostel. I drove 4 hours from Charlotte through a blizzard. I-40 in the Asheville Valley was a single lane. Salt-spraying trucks were present every half mile. Windshield wipers battled the cold rain. I arrived at my parents' house in Knoxville in the afternoon, carrying 4 individually wrapped gifts I had selected over the course of a month. A blue cashmere scarf for my mom, which she always showed in catalogs. A Shimano fishing reel for their dad, because his old one got stuck in the lake in September. A fire truck with a picture of a bear, decorated with a Bible because Liam has been busy with fire trucks since August, and a leather-bound notebook because Catherine said she wanted to write again. We opened the presents around the tree. Catherine was the first to open it. She always was. My mom and dad had given her a diamond tennis bracelet. Everything was in perfect harmony, from the velvet box to her breath, to my mom holding Catherine's wrist up to the light, and the afternoon sun filtering through the living room window. Derek filmed the scene with his phone. Then Catherine turned to me and handed me a candle. A vanilla candle. It was still in the medicine bag. I turned it over and read the discount sticker at the bottom. $4.99. My mom saw me looking. "I didn't know what you were looking for," she explained. My child's ignorance is a perfectly acceptable excuse for a $5 candle next to a diamond bracelet. "Thank you," I said. I smiled. The next day, I placed the candle on the passenger seat and drove home for 4 hours. I never lit it. It sat on a shelf in my apartment. I didn't have to look at it. I always knew it was there. Then, 2 years ago, Catherine's wedding was at a hotel. Nashville, a big place, 200 guests, a string quartet playing patchwork while Catherine walked down the hall on a white piano. I wasn't at the bride's wedding. Catherine had told me in March, 6 months before the ceremony, and said quietly, "The best way to break bad news to someone you don't respect is to tell them the truth. We didn't want to burden you with bridesmaids." The dress cost $280. I agreed to the price. I could have easily covered the cost of a full day's wages, but Catherine chose her college friend Megan to be her bridesmaid and two of Derek's nieces to be her groomsmen, so I sat in the back row between an elderly neighbor and someone I later learned was Derek's accountant. No one had told me about the rehearsal dinner until the day before. I found out about it through a message in the family group, and it seemed to me that I'd been online the whole time without realizing it. But I was the one who arrived at 7 a.m. to help with the event. I set up a table in the storage room on the gravel floor. I had about 200 wooden pieces and pots, each tied with a special knot from Catherine on Facebook and decorated with ribbon. I stayed behind the counter cleaning until midnight. I gathered the chairs, cleared the dance floor, and loaded the gifts into Derek's brother's car. Derek's brother stumbled a little, leaned against the back door, looked at me, and smiled. "So you're the one who works?" he said jokingly. It didn't sound like a joke. The next morning, I drove back to Charlotte. There was no thank you note. It just wasn't the right day. Not at all. I had breakfast at the hotel. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a long line across the bed, and the river outside was louder than the night before, mingling with the rain that had fallen while I slept. I sat at the head of the bed, phone in hand, and scrolled through my photo library, not looking for anything, just following my instincts. I found family photos. Perhaps 50 photographs were taken over the past 5 years. Birthdays, parties, on balconies, and in front of Christmas trees. I was in 3 of them. In 2 of them, part of me was cut off by the edge of the frame, half my shoulder, my jaw, as if the person holding the camera had placed the photograph around Catherine and then suddenly found me. I opened the chat in the family group and went back 6 months. My name appeared less often than anyone else's, and when it did, it was related to a task. "Rosalind, could you bring more chairs from the storeroom? Rosalind, could you pick up Liam's prescription on your way? Rosalind, could you bring some ice? No way. Rosalind, how are you? No way. Rosalind, we miss you. Never. Rosalind, are you okay?" I sat with my phone on my lap, scanning the data like I do at work. Patterns, frequencies, unfamiliar values. I hadn't forgotten this. Forgetting is random. It was organized. I was isolated when work was needed, and the connection was lost. The system was so old and entrenched that everyone in it, including me, had stopped realizing it was a system. I was the emergency contact for families who didn't want to call me in an emergency. I called Nay around noon. She answered on the second ring. She always did. I could hear the hospital voice behind her. The voice and her raised cheeks indicated she was resting at the medical center in Asheville. She said, "Nade, don't waste time saying hello. Call me." I told her everything. 2 episodes later, as Catherine's voice echoed through the hallway, my mother rushed to the parking lot, not to apologize, but to give me a severe dressing down. The 34 missed calls hadn't indicated what had gone wrong. Nadine listened to me as usual, meaning she listened without interruption until the line fell silent. Then she said, "When are you going to stop driving for 4 hours to make sure that you're not the one who won't give up your seat?" She wasn't being cruel. 9 doesn't do anything cruel. She was being precise, and that's worse, because precision can't be hidden. I sat on the bed in room 7 of the river bend, the phone to my ear and the river flowing outside the window, and I didn't say a word for a long time. "I don't know." "Rose," I said, that was the problem. "I know. You just hadn't said anything yet." After we ended the call, I opened the Notes app on my phone and wrote down a list. Things I want and things I wish I had. The wishes section filled up quickly. Respect, belonging, the part that has my name on it, a family that understands me when I'm not in the picture. The column filled up quickly. Candle, the last row, cleaning, blurry text, missing conversation. Holly, Holly, Holly. Sunday morning, the family group chat ignited. Catherine posted a selfie from the hotel pool, sunglasses, Liam on a boat behind her, mountains in the background, water, that perfect, unbelievable turquoise. "Family time in the mountains," she wrote, followed by a string of heart emojis. Mom immediately gave her a heart. Dad nodded contentedly. Derek posted a picture of a hiking trail. Liam was on his shoulder, disappearing among the trees, and he captioned it, "Making Memories." Mum gave that one too. I scrolled through the photos, replies, and subsequent messages. The trip plan looks fantastic. Liam is growing up so fast, and this is the best trip yet. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. No one even mentioned me or my absence. A girl and her sister drove for 4 hours, were told they weren't a real family, and then left. The frame didn't leave any marks because I was completely exhausted. My phone sent a private message. My great-grandfather Arthur's cousin Denise, who's a year older than me, lives in Melville, just outside Knoxville. Are you on that trip? I didn't see you in the photos. I looked at the message and typed it in. I went and finished writing the story. I wrote a long story and sent it. Denise replied quickly. Are you okay? I saw her reply on the screen and thought about the real answer, which was no, and the short version. When I got to that point, I wrote it down. Denise gave me a heart emoji. She didn't give me any feedback, and she didn't ask me any further questions that she knew I wasn't ready for. I'd only ever received small, special gifts from my family. I never thought I'd ever trust them. Monday morning. As I stood by the window of room 7, watching a heron fly over the shallow bank of the Clindover, my phone on the bedside table buzzed. A text from my father. I picked it up, expecting something complicated. Perhaps they left something at the hostel. Perhaps they wanted me to contact someone. Perhaps the trip ended early. My mother said she could share Ken's room when she returned. We shouldn't have booked 2 rooms for someone who wasn't traveling with anyone. I read the message. I read it again. I placed the phone on the windowsill and watched the silent heron. I raised one leg, waiting for the fish. My father had the chance to apologize, to believe what Catherine had said in the hallway, to show some remorse, but he had only a few people around him. No, we apologize. No, we should have planned better. No, Catherine lost control. This is my price. 32 years of free education, 60 hours of work per week, 4 hours of commuting per day, 200 basic necessities, and a message written on sumac paper. No one cared if I had a spouse or children occupying the other bed. No one to take anyone with. I picked up my phone and took a screenshot. Then I stood by the window, face down on the nightstand, and watched the heron catch the fish and freeze in place. I didn't delete the message. I didn't answer that. I held onto it like a candle, not to see it, but to remind myself that I hadn't invented it. The evidence was there, and numbers don't lie, even if the family claimed otherwise. That evening, I walked along the river behind the inn. The October air was cold now, carrying with it damp leaves and smoke from the chimneys above. The little dove ran over the flat stones, and I followed the sandy path that ran between the sycamore trees. I put my hands in my jacket pockets, and for the first time since the haul, I allowed myself to think clearly. I didn't look for excuses. This realization came quietly, without fuss, as is usually the case with important things. My mother's apology was conditional. Catherine's came with a summary of events. My father's apology came 3 weeks too late, repairing the damage done. Any apology from either of them would give me back what my family always apologizes for: my wasted time. Take me back to square one. Let me drive for another 4 hours, arrange the chairs, buy gifts, and stand at the end of the photo booth waiting for the next one. I've had enough. Not with anger, because anger will only drain the energy I've already expended. And not with revenge, because revenge requires considering the consequences. Just as the numbers were wrong from the start, and no amount of recalculation will change the data, it's about closing the book. I'm going to stop driving for 4 hours. I'm going to stop volunteering to clean and tidy. And I'm going to stop answering calls from people asking about you. I build my life with what I have: my job, my apartment, my bed, my coffee at 5:45 a.m., and I stop hauling firewood to a house where I have no place. My phone rings, not family. Grandpa Arthur, the man who never brings anyone along. Dad typed these words and pressed send. He didn't call them back. He didn't say, "Of course I didn't." If a member of your family has defined your worth by who you are, not by who you stand by, then you know why I stopped walking backwards. Stand with me. What happened on Thanksgiving Day changed everything. My grandfather, Arthur Mercer, was 82 years old and living alone on Lake Norris, 30 miles north of Knoxville. He'd been alone since his grandmother Dorothy died in 2016. and he'd stayed in that house because the lake was both a fishing ground and a place to build the life he wanted. Arthur Mercer didn't leave places just for the quiet. I'd been looking forward to visiting him ever since I drove to Gatlinburg. I always had. I'd always drive over half an hour from Knoxville and sit on his porch, sipping my coffee and listening to him talk about the wally fish he caught and the weather. He looked forward to seeing me too. "Where are you, Rosie?" His voice was as usual, firm and patient, the voice of someone who'd been giving orders on construction sites for 50 years and knew that time was more important than voice. I made the coffee. He told me the basics. I accepted it. The 2 rooms, the hallway, and the Savvywell entrance. No fuss. Arthur doesn't respond to jewelry. He responds to information. A long silence followed when I finished, and behind it, I heard the ticking of Grandpa's clock, the one Dorothy bought at auction in 1978, in the living room. He wouldn't allow anyone to move. "Your grandmother's going too," he said, and that was the end of it. Arthur started a building materials supply company in 1975 with a flatbed truck and $50 he borrowed from Dorothy's father. His business expanded to 11 locations in East Tennessee. In 2010, he sold his house, his truck, and his fishing rod, leaving him with nothing. He continued driving the truck and fishing for trout. He was still making his coffee at 5 in the morning because that was the start of his day, and he saw no reason to change it. He invited me to dinner on Saturday. "Come alone, just the 2 of us." I drove from Sayreville to Lake Norris for about an hour and a half, passing through small towns that became less crowded with tourists the further we got from the usual tourist routes. Arthur's house was at the end of a gravel road lined with oak trees that he and Dorothy had planted the year they bought the property. It had hardwood floors, a large eagle hung on the mantelpiece, and family photographs on every flat surface, some from the 1950s, of black and white people, of whom I remember only their names. He caught trout that morning. 2 large rainbow trout, cleaned and placed in a cast-iron skillet on the stove. We sat at the kitchen table where he paid by hand. The same table, the same chairs, the same formica surface on which he rested his elbows was worn and sticky, and we ate the fish with butter and lemon in little conversation because Arthur didn't consider silence a problem. After dinner, he sat down and asked the obvious questions, the kind you ask a supervisor on a job site. "How much is Catherine's mortgage?" I told him what I knew. "Does Derek earn enough to cover it?" I shook my head no. "What does your father do at that company?" I asked. Advice regarding the company Arthur had sold. There was no measurable job, no salary for the family charity. Arthur looked across the table. "I was sending your parents and Catherine $8,000 a month." I put down my fork. I didn't know. Nobody knew except them. And now you. Before I could stop, the calculations came in. 13 years, $8,000 a month, over $1 million. None of them built anything with it. He asked me, "How much did I send you?" I looked at him and said, "Nothing, Granddad." I never asked him. He shook his head and said, "I know." Arthur didn't tell me what he was planning. He wiped his hands with a napkin, carried the dishes to the sink, and said, turning his back, "I'm going to celebrate Thanksgiving this year. The whole family, Aunt Phyllis, cousins, old friends from the company." I wiped a plate and put it in the cupboard. "You haven't celebrated Thanksgiving in 6 years, so it's time." He said most of it in a low voice, as if the decision had been in a drawer and he had easily opened it. I don't explain. I don't invite discussion. Arthur announces things as the weather dictates. He comes, and you agree. The next day, I returned to Charlotte's car, to my office, to my reports, to my quarterly reviews, to the work routine that had always been the most stable system of my life. Client presentations, market analysis, conference calls where people addressed me as Madam. I heard Mercer and listened to him speak. I didn't call my parents, and they didn't call me. The silence between us was different now. Before Gatlinburg, it was the ordinary silence of a family that doesn't follow up on questions. A passive, quiet silence, the kind that makes you forget how to stop listening to the noise of traffic outside your window. After Gatlinburg, this became a choice I made. I did it without warning or negotiation. It was simple. I didn't answer the phone, I didn't drive for 4 hours, and I didn't ask if I needed anything. At first, it felt strange. Then it felt like I'd found my place. Then it felt like Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Each day I moved a little further away from the hotel lobby. Every week, it was as if something was missing. Then it would return. 6 weeks before Thanksgiving. 5 weeks later, Mom resumed talking in the family group as if nothing had happened. Thanksgiving at Grandma's. Who's bringing what? She added a turkey emoji and a heart, and her simple joy was perfectly balanced with the Gatlinburg vibe, so much so that I admired her wit. Catherine replied within minutes. I brought the wine I knew, the one charged to the family credit card my grandmother had been paying for since her college days. I brought the wine he didn't know, because Arthur's money came in generously every month. Mom cooked the dishes, Dad made the cornbread. I took care of the pot of green beans. Rosalind, could you bring a sweet potato casserole? Everyone loves it. I told him I wasn't a real family on vacation, so I checked the message. My dad said I didn't need a hotel room because I couldn't find anyone. And now, 6 weeks later, I'm expected to spend 3 hours peeling, mashing, seasoning, and baking sweet potatoes for people who don't have to worry about finding a bed. It wasn't courage, it was habit. Like a river flowing over a rock, and because of it, flowing over it, they passed Gatlinburg, forgetting when the waves would sweep them away. They assumed I'd do the same, because I always do. I'll be there, I replied. No emojis, no exclamation marks, no, I can't wait, or, see you soon. Carol might read the message and think it's all over. Catherine might read it and think I've forgotten my anger. They've both seen her determination. They've seen Rosalind always come, carrying the dishes, driving for 4 hours. Carol hasn't yet seen the screenshot on my phone or the last time I closed the account. Carol called me Tuesday night, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not quite quiet, just reserved. That's how people talk when they know they have something difficult to say and are trying to find a way to phrase it without costing them anything. I know you're still upset about the trip. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment in Charlotte, my computer open, looking through my client's files. I wasn't upset, Mom. I understood. She didn't like that answer. As she turned around on the sofa, I heard the stairs creak in the background. Catherine was excited. I knew how she felt. Liam had been difficult lately. Derek's hours at the shop had been reduced, and she was under a lot of pressure. We were trying hard to keep things running smoothly. I waited. I sometimes wonder what would happen if your grandmother stopped helping us, she said in a faint, changed voice, devoid of its charm. I don't know how we could do that. But I wouldn't. Your father's salary barely covers our basic expenses. Catherine hasn't worked in a long time, and Derek's commission is dwindling. It's just a mortgage payment. She fell silent. For a moment, I heard my mother's voice clearly. It wasn't the woman I'd been standing with in an empty hallway, laughing on the phone, but a 58-year-old woman who had never worked, whose financial existence depended entirely on the generosity of an 82-year-old man. It was true. I held her for a moment, and then it was over. That's why it's easier when everyone agrees. And there you have it. The fear was real, but the outcome was the same. Calm down. Don't make a scene. Give me my chair so Katrina can stay there. You kept things calm by giving her the chair. Mom, this isn't fair. The trip isn't fair. First, I hung up. Catherine posted a photo from her mountain trip on social media a week before Thanksgiving. The photo shows a seesaw, a cabin, a trail, a pool, William eating pancakes at a restaurant, and her back to the blue and gold smoked sausages on the porch. She captioned it, "Grateful for what matters most." The photo received 214 likes, 31 comments, and heart emojis from both friends and strangers. No one asked me where I was because the photos told the whole story and I wasn't part of it, so no one noticed my absence. But my cousin Denise did, and she texted me that night. You weren't in those pictures. What really happened in Gatlinburg? I told no one except Nadine and Arthur, not to protect my family, but because it had to come out, and I had to acknowledge how much pain I felt. I wasn't ready to let other people's reactions overshadow my own. But Denise asked me directly, and Denise was like family to me in every sense of the word. I said, the rooms, the hallway, Catherine's words, and my father's letter, I wrote it plainly, without any editorial commentary, simply stating the facts in order. Denise's reply came in 3 separate letters, each more scathing than the last. "So, what happened?" she said to Aunt Phyllis in front of everyone. Phyllis, Arthur's sister, was 78 years old, a passionate tax auditor, and had never given up on anything she believed was wrong in her life. He called me the following afternoon. "I heard about Gatlinburg. Is that true?" "Yes, ma'am. You waited a long time. Your grandmother was in mourning." The truth began to circulate among family members. Not as gossip, not as drama, but simply among those who believed in the importance of facts. I drove to East Tennessee the day before Thanksgiving week. But I didn't want to stay with my parents. It was a hotel in Knoxville, a highway rest stop, clean and quiet, with a bed and a bathroom and no family around. Another boundary, small and intentional, like all beautiful things. I drove to Arthur's house on Lake Norris on Thanksgiving morning, arriving before 8 a.m., the lake still fogged, the air thick with the cool scent of wood and pine. Arthur was in the kitchen making his grandmother's corn pudding, using a recipe written on a yellow card stuck to the refrigerator with a large, mouth-shaped magnet. The card featured Dorothy's handwriting, a picture of a flat, precise pickup truck, and a woman who had been a teacher before marrying a man with a $50 mortgage. 22. She helped set the table. Dorothy's porcelain plates, white with a delicate gold band, held all the dishes, just as she remembered. Arthur waved the serving forks himself, standing by the sink, brushing his teeth until they were clean. The guests arrived at 11 a.m. sharp. Aunt Phyllis went first, with Walker and the rest of the party, led by her nephew Craig. Uncle Gene, wearing a flannel shirt, looked older than me. My eyes met those of my cousin Denise, who was wearing a short coat, across the living room. 2 of Arthur's old construction friends, men in their 80s who still called him Art, were shaking hands, trying to make friends. Then the others arrived. Carol and Richard drove in their Buick. Carol is carrying a pot. Richard has his hands in his pockets, and behind them are Catherine, Derek, and Liam. Catherine is wearing a new butter-colored cashmere coat. Derek is wearing a shaving jacket. Catherine hugs her grandmother with both arms. "Happy Thanksgiving, Grandma." It's filled with bright lights and smiles. The dining room is as full as Dorothy had hoped. The turkey was on the large platter. Arthur had made corn pudding in a metal pot. 3 cakes sat on the side table, wrapped in a basket covered with a baby napkin. Arthur stood at the head of the table and said, "Prayer." His voice boomed as it should have in his workplace for 40 years. For food, for family, and for justice. Amen. 22 people responded. Amen. I sat down, and the noise began. Forks on porcelain, ice, and glasses. A medley of conversation among people from the same family who often didn't see each other. Catherine was the captivating one. She told stories about how Liam had picked 11 different kinds of leaves and the restaurant where a trout had fallen onto his fork. Derek ran 3 miles in the fog and returned, talking about a black bear he might have been thinking about. Leaning forward and waving her arms, she happily told them a story that filled the room and left no room for another. Then she raised her glass. "I want to raise a toast," she said, and silence fell over the table. The family, united through thick and thin. She looked at me when I said, "Come." It was a fleeting glance, half a second, maybe less. But I saw her. Aunt Phyllis saw her. Dennis saw her. Arthur, seated at the head of the table, the man who had cut his own meat for 8 decades, raised his head. He didn't say a word. He looked at me. I placed the glass on the toast table and didn't drink from it. The wine remained untouched. The silence between me and that glass was more powerful than anything Catherine had ever said. After the main course, while everyone else was chattering and Arthur's friends in the building were arguing about the Tennessee-Alabama game, Catherine started talking about a boat on the lake. Grandpa Derek was looking at one of these boats, a pontoon boat, that we could all use. Derek took it. A pickup truck, a Silverado, also caught my eye. Only one owner, and less than 50,000 miles on it. They were throwing these things around the room like balloons, randomly, to see who would catch them. Arthur chewed his cornbread and didn't say a word. I got up to wash the dishes. I took several plates from the kitchen and placed them next to the sink. Catherine followed me when she heard me behind her. Her voice was lowered. "This is a technique I use when I cook, but I don't want anyone listening." Are you staying overnight? I washed a plate. Catherine, I'm not a stranger to you. So don't play the victim. It's over. It was your choice. I placed the plate on the drying rack and turned to her, without taking up any space. She clenched her jaw. You can take it yourself. You always do. It's right there. The family operating system is running on very old software. Rosalind always perseveres. Rosalind always overcomes adversity. Rosalind doesn't need help. She doesn't need solitude. She doesn't need a room, a chair, or a place at the table, because Rosalind always loves it that way. I took a kitchen towel, dried my hands, and placed it on the table. I saw my sister standing in our grandmother's kitchen, wearing her cashmere coat, her hand on her hip, her jaw clenched, her whole life overshadowed by a man in a flatbed truck in the next room. I didn't say a word. I returned to the table. Delicious food. Arthur's lemon meringue. Not his recipe, but Dorothy's. A secret he'd never told anyone. Coffee in Dorothy's porcelain cups. Cups with gold rims that gleamed in the dining room. The table was cleared, as is customary after a sumptuous meal. People leaned back, unbuckled their seatbelts, and conversations began. Catherine chatted and laughed with Dennis and Craig, her voice carrying that same confident, intelligent quality she had displayed over the years. Then Rosalind suddenly appeared and left the room. We were all enjoying ourselves, and she was speaking in a very special way. She told the story like a family tale, as if she had sculpted it, refined it, and added her own special touch. Another story about the difficult Rosalind she hadn't yet reached. The table turned toward me. Not immediately. Slowly, as it rotated and faced me, the atmosphere of the room shifts when it senses something is about to change. Phyllis put down her fork. Dennis stopped talking. Uncle Gene looked down at his coffee. Arthur's fellow builders exchanged glances. Some knew what had happened at Gatlinburg. Some had heard snippets from Dennis or Phyllis. And some were hearing it for the first time, and they felt the weight of the silence that hung in the air. I sat there, my coffee cup in hand. I had been clenching my teeth for 32 years of silence. Then I looked at Arthur. He was at the head of the table, his napkin on his lap, his coffee beside his plate. He looked directly at me. He shook his head, a slight shake of his chin, the kind of shake one might lose if one didn't want to. I didn't ask permission. I tried to see if he could control what I said. I placed the coffee cup on the saucer. The clinking of the cup was faint, but the room felt like a courtroom. I didn't get up. I stood in my chair, put my hands on the table, and spoke in the voice I use for class presentations. Even because of that sound that didn't need to be raised. Catherine, you're right. She left. Silence fell over 22 people. The forks stopped. The glasses stopped halfway to their mouths. Phyllis's hand leaned toward the table. But you left the room you hadn't reserved for me. I stood there long enough for the silence to take its toll. You stood before strangers in the inn lobby and said, "We've booked rooms for the right family." Katrina's face changed. It wasn't guilt nor shame, but a sudden, stubborn attention to someone listening to his words in an unexpected direction. I turned to my father. He was sitting 3 seats away, holding a folded piece of cloth in his hand. "Dad, you texted me yesterday morning. Mom wanted me to share a room with Catherine. Then you wrote, we shouldn't have to book 2 rooms for someone who isn't bringing anyone." I deleted that part. Richard looked down at the plate. Carol put her hand to her mouth. Denise closed her eyes. Phyllis looked at Richard with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. It wasn't anger in the literal sense, but rather the deep, cold frustration of a woman who had seen a family built from nothing, and now its foundations crumbling. I sat down. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was telling you what had happened in front of people who should have heard it long ago. Catherine burst out like a torrent. Suddenly, without warning, the ground settled, then collapsed beneath what held it down. She rose so quickly that her chair scraped against the wood and her napkin fell to the floor. "You're amazing." Her voice reached the ceiling. "You're sitting at my grandmother's Thanksgiving table, playing the victim. You're gone. Nobody left you alone. We were on a family trip, and you got angry and took your car. And now you come home and try to turn everyone against us. Derek leaned forward in his chair, encouraged by Catherine's loud voice. She'd always been like that. Strange. Everything about her. Aunt Phyllis interrupted her with a voice that could have stopped traffic. "Catherine, sit down." She didn't shout. She didn't raise her hand. She spoke as if correcting a child who had forgotten her place. Her authority stemmed from 78 years spent saying things she didn't want to say. Then my mother tried. "This isn't the place." I looked at Catherine. She stood with her head held high, her hands clasped behind the chair. I sat down with my hands on the table, my voice still. "Catherine, you told me in the hotel lobby, in front of strangers, that I'm not part of the family. I'm telling the truth in front of people who know us. You can judge which is worse." She shook her head rapidly, as if I were hitting her. "You've always been jealous. You can't stand the fact that I have a husband, a child, and a life. That's the point. You're jealous too, and you always have been." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The room had already made up its mind. It wasn't about what I said, but about the way their faces looked. Catherine smiled, standing trembling, her voice shaking in the beam of light. I sat in the chair, my hands on the table, my face blank. Even Derek had fallen silent, the power having completely cut out. Arthur put down his coffee. Enough. That was all he needed. Complete silence filled the room. Arthur, 82, rose slowly and deliberately. He placed his hands on the table. A change of heart, a deliberate lifting of someone who understood the value of stability and didn't waste it. The room was waiting. He said, "I started working at 16, in a grocery store, then in a lumber yard, then in the back of someone else's truck until I bought my own. I worked for a flatbed truck company and borrowed $50 from Dorothy's father. He told me I would lose every penny. It didn't happen. 11 centers, 40 years. I didn't beg or expect anything." He looked around the table at his sister Phyllis, his old friends, his cousins and their children, and the plates of cakes. Then his eyes fell on Catherine, Richard, and Carol. "I've sent this family over $1 million in 13 years. Rent, car payments, tuition. Catherine, you can't buy a house without a check, credit cards, or a mortgage. The room hasn't been cleaned. None of the people who took this money built anything. They just left it unused." Then he looked at me, his voice unchanged. Arthur's voice didn't soften. It shifted like a compass needle changing when it finally reaches north. "The only person who didn't ask me to smell was someone like your grandfather." He sat down, took his coffee, and drank it. Catherine opened her mouth. "Grandfather, not me, I'm done." "Catherine, eat your cake." He said he'd said 1,000 things in 1,000 jobs. Final cleaning. Time at the end of a sentence that doesn't need a second look. Catherine didn't eat her cake. No one moved at that table for a long time. They went first. Of course they did. While Derek gathered their coats, Catherine carried Liam, who was playing mercifully in the living room, into the kitchen without him noticing. Quickly, those in the know want to address the situation before it worsens. I was standing by the sink, pouring a cup of coffee, when Catherine appeared in the doorway. Liam was leaning back, his face against her shoulder. Derek was standing behind her, his coat draped over his arm. Her voice was low and angry, a trembling whisper. "Do you realize what you've done? He'll cut everything off. Do you understand? He'll shut everything down because of what you've done." I turned off the tap and dried my hands with a towel. "I didn't ask him to do anything, Catherine. You don't have to. You should have been a martyr. You should have sat there with your quiet voice and sad face. You should have made everyone pity you." I said, "I told the truth. In front of people who needed to hear it. Just like your mother in the hallway." She looked at me. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. I looked up as she searched for an answer, only to find the shelf empty. Liam leaned over her shoulder and lifted it. For a moment, just a moment, I looked beyond the anger to what lay beneath. A woman stood in her kitchen and realized that the very structure of her life depended entirely on the monthly flow of an 82-year-old man, as he had recounted to a crowd of witnesses. She grabbed her coat, she took the keys, she left without saying a word. Derek followed me. In the evening, the guests returned to their homes one by one, two by two. Phyllis kissed me on the forehead at the door. Dennis shook my hand. The construction workers shook Arthur's hand and said nothing about what had happened, because people of that generation keep secrets and never forget them. Arthur was washing the dishes. He wouldn't accept my help. "You've done enough for today, Rosie." I could hear the sound of running water and the clinking of Dorothy's china through the kitchen window. I sat on the veranda in one of the rocking chairs, listened to the sound of the lake, and watched the last rays of light fall on the water. The lattice door opened behind me. Richard put on his coat and went outside, car keys in hand. Carol had already gotten into the Buick, sitting in the passenger seat. He was standing on the porch behind me and said this without turning around. "I shouldn't have sent that letter." "No, you shouldn't have sent it." "I don't say everything I mean, Dad. I didn't want to speak loudly." And just as Liam had polished his shoes when asked to apologize, he rubbed the ship's planks with the tip of his foot. Would she be all right? I rocked the chair gently and looked across the lake. There, on a pier across the water, a light shone steadily in the darkness. "I'm fine. I've lived in a room, or on a chair, or somewhere in the picture for 32 years. I'll stay fine." He shook his head. He stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to give him something. Maybe an apology or permission to make him feel that the journey home wasn't the worst 2 hours of his life. I didn't give it to him. He went down the porch steps and across the gravel to the Buick. Carol was crying in the passenger seat. He got in and started the engine. The taillights skidded off the curb, turned into the road, and disappeared around the bend where oak trees blocked the road. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, the money stopped. Arthur didn't notify him, didn't call a meeting, and didn't send a letter. December 1st arrived, and the $8,000 that had been transferred monthly for 13 years was split between my parents and Catherine's family, as no one questioned the utility bill. The January payment didn't arrive either. No explanation, no warning, just an eerie silence in a bank account that had never known such silence before. The result was like water flowing after a flood. Slowly at first, then suddenly, the current revealed what it had hidden. Catherine and Derek sold their lifestyle first. The barber's jacket was sent to a tailor. Grandpa paid with a credit card. Derek took on extra shifts at the car dealership. Working in the showroom on Saturday mornings is the kind of time that always makes you hungry. Catherine had landed a part-time job at a hardware store in West Knoxville. It was her first job in 7 years. She called me in January, not to apologize, not to yell, but to ask how I could get her resume. I put the phone on speaker and sat at my kitchen table in Charlotte, explaining the process to her step by step. Work history, skills, and vacation years are listed under family affairs. I helped because I was being myself. Helping my sister on my resume didn't make me pretend the front door didn't exist. My parents built a small house. The 4-bedroom house, which my grandfather bought with his own money over a decade, was put up for sale in February. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the University of Texas campus. Richard had his first real job in years. He was a resource coordinator at a community college. He was starting over at 60, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel something. But it wasn't joy. It was a deep empathy, born of seeing someone face a reality they'd avoided for 30 years. Carol texted me in January. Short, no introduction. "I'm sorry about the trip. I'm sorry about a lot of things," she said. It was the first time I'd ever written "I'm sorry" in 32 years. I waited 2 days. Then I said, "I know, Mom." The door stayed open, not quite the same. My cousin Denise set up a group chat with me and my Aunt Phyllis. Every week we talked about everything: work, the weather, and fond family memories. Rosalind's visits to my grandmother became a regular occurrence. Every other Saturday, we fished for trout on the veranda, drinking coffee in Dorothy's mugs, the lake changing colors with the seasons. Spring cherry blossoms bloomed on the lake's shores, a pale pink against the dark water, their petals fluttering in the wind and falling like scraps of paper onto the pebbles in a procession no one had ever orchestrated before. I stopped at Arthur's house and found 2 cups of coffee on the porch. Steam was rising from Dorothy's cups, and a fishing rod leaned against the wall as if waiting its turn. I sat in the second rocking chair, the one that was always there, the one that was always mine, even if I didn't know it. We drank our coffee and looked out at the lake. He said, "Do you know what the best thing about building something yourself is? Tell me. No one can take it from you because it was never given to you in the first place. I smiled. I drank my coffee. The lake was calm, cherry blossoms were falling, the balcony creaked under the weight of two people talking. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay in the hotel lobby. Go back to the table, look your family in the eye, and tell them the truth. Not with anger, not with a desire for revenge, but with your own voice. The hotel lobby and the Thanksgiving table. We are a real family. The one who never takes anyone with her. The girl who rode for 4 hours and the grandmother who counted every dollar. If Rosalind's 32 years of silence remind you of your own, perhaps it's time to unpack and speak up. Share this with someone you trust. Comment and subscribe. The next story is waiting.